On April 6, 2018, a bus carried 29 people down a Saskatchewan highway. They were heading to a playoff game. 16 never arrived.
The worst nightmare has happened.
Within hours, arenas went dark, sticks lined porches. A country stopped playing the only game that ever felt like a religion.
So thankful and just devastated.
This is the story of the night hockey stopped in Canada. In Canada, junior hockey runs through small towns like electricity through a wire. Teams don't belong to corporations. They belong to communities. And nowhere was that more true than in Humboldt, Saskatchewan. Population 6,000. The biggest building in town wasn't the church or the school. It was the Algar Peterson Arena. 1,800 seats, standing right at the western entrance of the community like a front door. The Humboldt Broncos were founded in 1970. Green and gold. Junior A. They'd won the national championship twice. But what made them different wasn't the trophies. It was how the town ran the team. Local volunteers handled operations. Local families opened their homes and took players in for the season. Fed them, drove them to practice, treated them like their own kids. The Broncos weren't a franchise. They were a family. The roster that spring was built the way every junior team is. Young guys between 16 and 21, most from small towns across Saskatchewan and Alberta. They dyed their hair blonde for the playoffs. They grew beards. They rode buses for hours across flat prairie highways to play in rinks just like theirs. Their coach was Darcy Hogan, 42 years old, a wife, Christina, and 2 sons. He'd come up through the Alberta junior ranks before landing in Humboldt. One of his former players said it best. He never gave up on anybody. He was always there for every one of his players. You wanted to win for him. And then there was Adam Harold, 16, a defenseman, the youngest player on the roster. He wasn't even a full-time Bronco. He had joined the team just for the playoff run. His father said he would have been the 4th generation to work the family farm, maybe after a hockey career.
He loved the farm and he'd want it to get done.
That April, the Broncos were in the semifinals against the Nipawin Hawks, down 3-1. Game 5 was in Nipawin, a 2-hour drive north on Highway 35, a road they had taken dozens of times before. What made this trip different from every other wasn't the road. It was what it would reveal about Canada itself. On April 6, 2018, 29 people boarded the bus in the arena parking lot. Glenn Dirksen, the 59-year-old bus driver, greeted each one as they climbed on. He'd driven the Broncos to games across rural Saskatchewan before, and he loved doing it. His son later said he did it with a smile on his face every single time. It was 5 in the afternoon, bright, sunny, and clear. About 29 kilometers northwest of Tisdale, there's an intersection where Highway 335 crosses the road, a rural crossroads near the tiny settlement of Armley. Highway 335 traffic faces an oversized stop sign with a flashing red light directly above it. Nothing blocked the view that evening. Coming west on Highway 335 was a semi-truck hauling 2 trailers loaded with peat moss. Behind the wheel was Jaskirat Sidhu, a 29-year-old permanent resident from India recently hired by a small Calgary trucking company. He'd had 1 week of training and 2 weeks of supervised driving before being sent out alone. April 6th was only his 2nd solo long-haul trip. Sidhu drove through the stop sign at full speed. No skid marks were found on the road. He never touched the brakes. Glenn Dirksen saw the truck coming and hit his brakes 24 meters before the intersection, but at highway speed, that's less than a second. The bus struck the truck's front trailer broadside. The front of the bus was torn apart on impact. 14 people were gone at the scene. 2 more followed in the hospital. 13 survived. Among those lost were 10 players, head coach Darcy Hogan, assistant coach Mark Cross, athletic therapist Dana Bronze, the only woman on the bus, statistician Brody Hines, the play-by-play voice of the team Tyler Bieber, and Glenn Dirksen behind the wheel. Logan Boulet's parents, Toby and Bernadine, had left Humboldt not long after the bus, driving up to Nipawin to watch what they thought would be their son's last junior hockey game. They came upon the wreckage before they reached the arena. Logan's billet brother, sitting in the front seat, looked out and said, "That's a Bronco hockey bag in the middle of the road." Dana Bronze was 24 years old. Her mother, Carol, later said, "We did walk Dana down the aisle, but we weren't escorting a bride. We were escorting a casket." SJHL President Bill Chow stood at a press conference in Saskatoon, barely holding it together, and said 5 words that carried the weight of an entire province.
The worst nightmare has happened.
By Saturday morning, the weight of it had settled into every arena, every dressing room, every broadcast booth in North America. It happened to be the final Saturday of the NHL regular season. All 7 Canadian teams played that night, but not one of them felt like hockey. In Winnipeg, the Jets and the Blackhawks skated out with the nameplates on their jerseys replaced by a single word: Broncos. They stood side by side around a circle of light at center ice while the building went completely dark and silent. Ron MacLean opened Hockey Night in Canada by telling the country that tonight, all of us are in one city and one city only: Humboldt. Don Cherry devoted an entire coach's corner to the 29 people on the bus, while a montage of their photos played to Wheat Kings by the Tragically Hip. Hockey sticks began appearing on front porches across the country overnight. Every province, every city, every small town, Canadians placed their sticks outside their doors without anyone organizing it, and the image spread so fast that it became the defining visual of a nation in grief. 2 days after the crash, over 3,000 people packed into the 1,800-seat Algar Peterson Arena for a vigil, with 2 overflow areas set up outside. Prime Minister Trudeau was there. Don Cherry was there. Survivor Nick Shalansky walked in wearing his white jersey with a cut still visible under his eye and a playoff beard still on his face. Kevin Geringer stepped to the microphone and opened with 5 words: "We are all Humboldt Broncos." A GoFundMe passed $15 million, the largest in Canadian history at the time. And then there was Logan Boulet. The 21-year-old defenseman passed on April 7th, and his parents made the decision to donate his organs, saving at least 6 lives. What followed was something no one predicted. In a single weekend, 3,071 Albertans registered as organ donors when the provincial average was 425 per week. Within weeks, nearly 150,000 Canadians had signed up. Green Shirt Day was later established in his memory, turning one family's choice into a national movement. But while the country grieved together, 13 young men were lying in hospital beds across Saskatchewan, facing injuries that would reshape the rest of their lives. And nobody warned them how hard that would be. The vigils ended, the cameras left, and 13 young men were left alone with what came next. Brian Strechnitsky was 19 years old when the crash left him paralyzed from the chest down. Permanent, the doctors said. His mother, Michelle, put it plainly: "I am beyond heartbroken that my big, beautiful boy will never get to realize his dreams in stand-up hockey." Strechnitsky refused to let that be the end of his story. He took up sledge hockey and by 2023 was working alongside accessibility advocate Rick Hansen to make buildings more accessible for people in wheelchairs. Morgan Gobet was the most severely injured survivor. A traumatic brain injury left him unable to speak or walk, and he spent 333 days in hospital, the last player to be released on March 4th, 2019. During that time, his family made sure he graduated from high school from his hospital bed, celebrated his 19th birthday, and attended his brother's wedding. Tyler Smith came back from 2 broken ribs, a broken shoulder blade, a punctured lung, a stroke, and having 6 inches of his small intestine removed. He returned to play 10 games with the Broncos that fall, determined to get back to normal, but normal didn't exist anymore. He eventually left the team and later explained why. "I was coming back to all these environments and all these places, and I wasn't seeing the faces that I wanted to see." He also spoke about something that most people on the outside never considered. There are a lot of guys that have to live with the pictures in their minds. That's something I would never wish for anybody. The injuries you could see were only part of it. Survivor's guilt, post-traumatic stress, the unbearable weight of being the ones who made it when 16 others didn't. And through it all, one question lingered. Who was driving that truck, and why didn't he stop? The answer would divide the country in a way almost no one expected. Jaskirat Zadoo had recently married and was building a life in Calgary when Adesh Deol Trucking put him behind the wheel of a semi with almost no preparation. His logbook from the 11 days before the crash contained 70 violations of federal and provincial trucking regulations, mostly discrepancies in documenting his hours, the kind of rules specifically designed to prevent driver fatigue. He wasn't impaired by drugs or alcohol, and he wasn't on his phone. He told the court that a loose tarp on his cargo had distracted him, and that he simply never registered the flashing stop sign or any of the advanced warnings before it. The company that put him on the road faced its own reckoning. Owner Sukhmander Singh was charged with 8 counts of non-compliance with safety regulations, pleaded guilty to 5, and was fined $5,000. The company shut down. In January 2019, Zadu pleaded guilty to all 29 counts. 2 months later, he was sentenced to 8 years, the longest in Canadian history for this charge without alcohol, drugs, or intent. He was granted full parole in January 2023. Then came a deportation order. As of early 2026, with a wife and 2 Canadian-born children, one with a rare lung disorder, his case remains unresolved. But the question of whether justice had been served split the families right down the middle. Christina Hogan, widow of head coach Darcy Hogan, said, "I forgive him. When he closes his eyes, I'm sure he sees horrific things. And I just would hope that he can forgive himself and know that he's allowed to be happy too." Chris Joseph, whose 20-year-old son Jackson was among the 16, saw it differently. If we lose everything else but he gets deported, that might be the only thing that gives us a little bit of peace. And Russ Harold, father of 16-year-old Adam, the youngest lost, asked the question no one could answer cleanly. What about the humanitarian side of the parents who lost their children? When a CBC interviewer told Zadu that Christina Hogan had forgiven him, his voice broke. All he could say was, "Thank you. I have shame, have a lot of sadness."
I have shame, I have guilt, I have sadness, and all of those things I deal with every day.
His lawyer framed it as something larger than one man's fate. To what extent are we a generous and a forgiving country? There is no clean answer, and that's the point. On September 12, 2018, the Humboldt Broncos played hockey again. The opponent was the Nipawin Hawks. New coach Nathan Oystrick stood behind the bench with an entirely rebuilt roster, except for 2 familiar faces. Crash survivors Braden Camrood and Derek Patter, the only players from that bus who came back. Camrood finished the season with 55 points, playing like a man carrying the weight of everyone who couldn't be there. After the first game back, he told reporters, "I wanted to win. I felt like I let people down." After the game, 29 banners were raised to the rafters. 16 for those who were gone, 13 for those who survived. All 29 numbers retired forever. Coach Oystrick put it simply, "I don't know what normal is, but we're just going to come to the rink every morning and compete and work." The families didn't just grieve, they fought. Saskatchewan introduced over 121 hours of mandatory training for new commercial truck drivers within a year. Every other province followed. Electronic logging devices replaced the paper logbooks that had made those 70 violations invisible. The intersection itself was rebuilt. Rumble strips, warning signs, cleared sight lines. Chris Joseph made a promise that still holds. We won't stop fighting. We won't stop because we know that there are deaths on the road every day. That highway isn't just a road anymore. And Canada isn't quite the same country it was before April 6th, 2018. Some stories don't end when the credits roll. The debate over forgiveness and justice is still unresolved. What happened to the Humboldt Broncos didn't just change hockey. It held up a mirror to an entire country and asked what it truly values. That reflection hasn't faded. It never will. If this story stayed with you, the next one is already waiting. Subscribe to Skates and Scars, where every story cuts beneath the surface of the game. And if you want to support the channel, hit that super thanks button below. Every super thanks goes directly into the next story.